greater than all we seek, greater than all we ask. He has done great things.
All right, good morning, Crossroads. Man, I'm glad you're here as we kick off a new message series. If this is your first time here, you picked a good Sunday to be here just as we get this thing kicked off. We are taking a look at the life of Joseph, this character in the Old Testament. Just kind of going to work through his life and look at his story. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Just a great story and a great character and some great lessons in his life that we're going to be looking at as we just work through that story in the Old Testament. Now, if you've never heard of Joseph, maybe you haven't been in church very much, or it's been a long time since you were in church and you don't know much about the life of Joseph, that's okay. Because like I say, we are going to literally work through his entire life story, and by the end of it, you'll know a lot about Joseph and really have a good understanding of some of the life principles that are in the story of Joseph. Now, maybe you don't know much about Joseph, but maybe you've heard the musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Or is that too old? Anybody? All right, a few of you know that one. If you're like me and you grew up in church, and you were in Sunday school, and you had all those Bible lessons, probably the thing that sticks out most about Joseph is that Joseph had what? A coat of many colors. That's like the thing that sticks in our mind about the life of Joseph. We're going to take a look a little bit more in depth at Joseph's life and learn a little bit more than just the coat of many colors and find out more about his life and some of the things that are going on in his life. Now, one of the things that we are going to spend a lot of time talking about, because it really is kind of the thread that runs throughout the story of Joseph. It's kind of the major theme in the story of Joseph, is an idea called providence. Now, what is providence? Well, providence comes from the word provide. And so providence is this idea that God cares for, God provides, God sustains, God superintends, God guides and directs everything in all the universe and in all of creation. And He is working out everything according to His provision, according to His care, according to His watching over, everything according to His purpose and His plan. Now, more specifically, it refers to God's supervision and care for the universe and for all of creation in such a way that His purposes and His plans are fulfilled and all of history is moving according to that purpose and plan. Every event, every circumstance, every situation, every particle of dust, every blade of grass, every rock, every tree, every animal, every particle, and every atom in all the universe is under the control and direction of God and moving according to His purpose and His plan. So that the Bible says that the purposes of God are sure. In other words, God never plans something and then goes, oh man, that didn't work out the way I planned. Everything that God purposes, He does. Everything that God designs will come to an end, and all of history is moving toward a single conclusion that is sure because God is moving it that way. Because God is directing it that way. Now that's the idea of providence. Now, providence even has maybe a little bit more application because providence is God at work in our lives. How God's plan is being worked out and pursued and brought to fulfillment and fruition in our lives. This idea really runs throughout the Bible. The Bible says, Ephesians chapter 1 says that God works all things according to His good purposes. So everything is working according to His purpose and His plan. The Bible says the ways of God are sure. The Bible says that man plans his ways, but God's plans always are fulfilled or always are successful. And maybe the verse that most encapsulates this idea of providence is Romans 8:28. If you've got a Bible with you, you can take a look there. If you've got one of our outlines, it's right at the top of the outline. It's on the screen behind me. If you've got your phone and you've got the YouVersion Bible app, you can download our outline all right there on your phone. So lots of ways for you to interact with the Word of God today. There's also some Bibles in the seats around you. And if you don't have a good Bible at home, please take one of those with you as a gift from us to you. So Romans 8:28. It says, God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him and are called according to his purposes. God works all things. God causes all things to work together for good. God's purpose is always worked out in everything, so that God causes all things to work for our good and his purposes in everything all the time. And that is this idea of providence. Now, by the way, as an aside, just let me say this. That's why I don't believe in luck. Okay? Now, you'll occasionally hear me say something like, wow, that was lucky. And you're going to be like, Sean, I thought you didn't believe in luck. Okay? That's just kind of a way of expressing things. But really, as a follower of Christ, as a believer in God, there is no such thing as luck. Because luck is random circumstances, purposeless events, things that really have no connection, just working out for good in our lives. But as followers of Christ, we don't believe in random circumstances. We don't believe in purposeless events. And so really when we experience what we call luck, is we are experiencing the blessings of God's providence. That he is working things out for our good. And so God's providence is when you're caught at a stoplight and then 2 minutes down the road there's a car accident and God protects you from being in that car accident. And that wasn't just luck. God's working out his purpose and his plan, guarding you and safeguarding you. God's providence is shown us when you're in a car accident and you hit a tree, and if you'd have been 1 foot in the other direction, things would have gone really badly. That's God's providence being worked out in your life. So it's not luck, it's not just chance, it's we believe that God works for our good. God works for our favor in life. And so things aren't random. God is at work. But God's providence isn't just manifested in lucky stuff. Okay? God's providence isn't just manifested when things are good, when things are beneficial in our lives. His providence is always at work in everything in your life. On good days and bad days. In good circumstances and bad circumstances. In things that are pleasurable and easy and delightful in your life, and in things that are painful in your life. On days where the sun is shining and on days where it's dark, God's providence is at work and he is working out his providential plan. And that, by the way, is the theme or the thread that runs throughout the story of Joseph in the Bible. That's what we're going to be looking at as we work our way through this series over the next several weeks. God is providentially working out his purpose, working out his plan in the life of Joseph, in the life of his family, oh, and by the way, in the history of the world. It's all working out. That's one of the cool things as you look at many of the stories in the Bible. If you will look at this thread of God's providence, you will see that all of human history often hangs in the balance of what God does and how God works out his plan. And that's true in the life of Joseph. Sometimes he's working behind the scenes. Sometimes it's seen very clearly. So let's take a look at Genesis chapter 37. And we're going to work through quite a bit of scripture today, just kind of getting a feel for Joseph and this storyline. So Genesis 37. And it starts out and it says, this is the account of Jacob's family line. And you say, well, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about Joseph. Well, we are. Jacob's his dad. And so the rest of the story is kind of the outworking of his dad's story through the life of his son and through the life of the rest of his kids. Now let me just say this. Joseph comes from a dysfunctional family. Like major dysfunction in the life story of Joseph. In fact, we've talked about this before. When you look at the Bible, if you go, man, I'm going to look for a pattern for the family in the Bible, you are hard-pressed to find a healthy, functioning family. Most of them are pretty messed up, and this one is a prime example. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. Joseph's dad's name is Jacob. His dad's name was Isaac, whose dad's name was Abraham. And Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. He is the very first Jew. God calls Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees. He says, I'm going to use you, I'm going to bless you, and through your family, all the nations on the earth are going to be blessed, and I'm going to make you into a great people, and all these promises that are given to Abraham. So that's Joseph's great-grandfather. It's Jacob, his dad's grandfather. Now, Jacob, his dad, wasn't a very good guy. He wasn't a very nice guy. In fact, Jacob was such a deceiver that his name, Jacob, came to mean deceiver. Okay, so he deceived his dad. He deceived his brother. And through deception, he gets the birthright that belongs to his brother. And he gets the blessing from his father. And his brother wants to kill him. And so he has to run away and escape. Now, God's still working in the midst of all of that. And it's one of the things we're going to learn in the life of Joseph is that God can even work through sinful human beings. So God is working in what Jacob's doing, deceiving his dad and deceiving his brother. And he runs away because his brother's ready to kill him. And he goes to his family in a far-off land. And he falls in love with this girl named Rachel. And so he goes to Rachel's dad, this guy named Laban. He says, all right, I want to marry her. And Laban says, okay, you can marry her if you work for me for 7 years. Which is pretty rough, all right? So for 7 years, he works for his father-in-law. Finally, the day comes, I've worked for 7 years, and he says, okay, I'm going to give you Rachel as your wife. So his father-in-law deceives him, however. And, she's wearing a veil, and he doesn't know who it is, and he has the honeymoon with her, and in the morning, lo and behold, it's her homely older sister. And it's not Rachel. And so he goes to the dad like, you deceived me, you tricked me, you gave me the ugly older sister, and I want the one that I worked for. And he's like, okay, you can have her, but you got to work for me for another 7 years. Now, at that point, I might have cried foul, but no, he works for another 7 years, and he gets Rachel, he gets to marry her right then, and he has to work for another 7 years. And then at the end of that, he says, okay, I've worked for 7 years, I'm ready to leave. And his father-in-law says, hey, why don't you stay here, work with me a little bit longer, you can make some more money. And so he works for another 6 years. So for 20 years total, he's working for his father-in-law. Guys, wouldn't that be great? To work for your father-in-law for 20 years? All right. So that's what Joseph's dad, Jacob, does. And he winds up deceiving his father-in-law. Whole long story there, that's not what we're focused on. But what winds up happening, so he's got 2 wives. He's got Rachel and he's got homely older sister Leah that he's married to. But God sees that Jacob loves Rachel more than he loves Leah, and so he opens Leah's womb. In other words, she's fruitful. She has lots of kids, all right? So Rachel gets jealous of the fact that Leah is having lots of kids, and so she says, hey, you can have my handmaiden, you can sleep with her and have kids with her. I told you, it's twisted, all right? It is major dysfunction. So he says, you can have my handmaiden, you can sleep with her, and those kids will be mine. And so he does that, and he has kids by then. Well, then Leah gets jealous of the fact that Rachel's handmaiden is having kids, and so she says, here, you can have my handmaiden. And so he marries her. So he winds up with 4 wives. It's a bad situation. He has children by her. So, you talk about blended families. Okay, God can work through blended families because, this one, you talk about jealousy and rivalry and all that. It's all going on in this family. Rachel still hasn't had any kids. And so finally, God looks with favor on Rachel and she has a child. And his name is Joseph. So this is the environment that Joseph grows up in. Now let me tell you a little bit about Joseph's brothers, some of the things that take place with Joseph's brothers. Joseph has an older sister named Dinah. And Dinah is raped by the prince of this city named Shechem. And Joseph's dad, Jacob, does nothing. He does nothing about it. And so 2 of Joseph's older brothers get mad about the thing, and so they go to the city of Shechem and they say, tell you what, we'll let you marry our sister, and we will marry with some of your sisters, and we'll just have, this whole wife swap thing going on, and we'll make an agreement with each other, but you guys have to become like us, you have to be circumcised. And all the guys in the city said, sounds like a good deal to me. I would have vetoed that one too, but okay. So they said, all right, sounds like a good deal to us. So all the guys in the city are circumcised, and while they are recovering from the surgery, Joseph's 2 older brothers go in and they kill every man in the city. They decimate an entire city. So those are Joseph's older brothers. Cool guys, huh? He's got another brother named Simeon, and Simeon sleeps with one of his father's wives. He sleeps with his stepmom, okay? And so dad's not real excited about that. Okay, so all I have to tell you, Joseph's family is messed up. All right, there are issues in Joseph's family. Now, I want you to take a look at what happens next. It says, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. Those are the 2 like the stepwives. Okay, those are the two handmaids. So Joseph, a young man, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Did anybody have that little brother? You know, like, you couldn't do anything without him tattling. That's Joseph. I mean, he's to go off, so they're his stepbrothers. They don't really like him anyways, and he goes and he comes back and gives a bad report. So things aren't going well with Joseph and the brothers anyways. Now, look at the next part. Now, Israel, that's Jacob's alternate name. His dad's alternate name is Israel. God changes his name to Israel. Says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Just parenting principle, that's not good, okay? To have a favored child is not a good thing. Now, I mean, the favored kid may like it, but the others aren't too excited about that. Now, Jacob should have known that because he and his brother Esau was the favorite. Esau was the one his dad liked the best. And so Jacob's all messed up as a result of that, but Jacob repeats the mistakes of his dad, and Joseph's his favorite son. So Joseph's the one who gets treated specially, and Joseph's the one that he pours out his love on. And so, I mean, can you imagine in a blended family? Can you imagine in his mind, yours and ours, you know, all that going on, and stepmoms and all this, and Joseph's the one that dad likes the best. And he's the youngest. And you already got two brothers that have killed an entire city, so, I mean, you probably don't want to get them mad. But that's the circumstances that Joseph grows up in. He loved him more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. King James Version says it was a coat of many colors. Now, there's some difficulty with the translation of what exactly was the coat of many colors. Like I say, King James Version says coat of many colors. NIV says an ornate robe, whatever it was. He gave him like a Letterman jacket for him and his son. You know? It was like fancy, you know? It's something that sets him apart. So there's this beautiful coat that he wears. Now, some translators say really what it's better is it's a long-sleeved coat and a coat that goes all the way to the ground. It's the kind of robe a prince would wear. A kind of robe that royalty would wear. It is not the kind of thing you would wear to work out in the field. And so what some people say is that essentially what Jacob did is said, Joseph, you don't have to work like the rest of your brothers do. You don't have to go out there and get your hands dirty. You don't have to, tell you what, all you got to do is just report back to me. Just tell me what they're up to. Supervise them. I know you're the youngest, but you're the best. And so you go out there and you supervise them, you watch over them. Now you can imagine how that went with Joseph's brothers. Because already they don't like him because he's the tattletale little brother. But now Dad loves him more. Now Dad sets him apart. Now Dad gives him special favor and special honor in his life. And so when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. I mean, they couldn't even say good morning to Joseph. They didn't have a nice thing to say about Joseph. Anybody ever had somebody get that mad at you? I mean, they can't even talk to you anymore. They can't even, like if they see you in the grocery store, they cannot even give to you a, hey, what's up? They cannot have a kind word for you. And that's the hatred, that's the anger that Joseph's brothers feel for him. Now, I mean, it just goes from bad to worse. And I gotta say, Joseph's a teenager, and so maybe he doesn't think as clearly as he should at moments. Okay? Because what happens next? It says Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Now I don't know how much more, like they already hate him so much they can't talk to him. But now they hate him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and I'm sure they're thinking, Joseph, you ain't bound a sheaf of grain in like 10 years, dude. He said, we were bounding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Man, that's awesome, Joseph. You know, I mean, maybe he should have kept that to himself and not told them about that one. So his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they, what? Hated him all the more. Now, here's the thing I want you to see. I think sometimes in our little kid Bible story version of Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors, Joseph's the good guy, and the brothers are the bad guys, and Joseph's really this righteous, holy, good guy, and the brothers are all the bad guys. And that may play well in the little kid's Bible story realm, but that's not real life. In real life, we're all broken, messed up people. And Joseph was too. Joseph's got some arrogance. Joseph's got some pride in the fact that I'm Dad's favorite. I've got the Letterman jacket. I'm awesome and you're not. I'm the boss. I'm in charge. And oh, by the way, I had a dream, and y'all are all going to bow down to me. Now, I don't know how Joseph thought that was going to play out when he told that to the brothers, but it didn't play out well, as you're going to see in the rest of the story. It says, then he had another dream. So the brothers are like, Joseph, what are you talking about? Like, you're going to rule over us? You're going to reign over us? And Joseph's like, no, wait a minute, I'm not finished yet. I got another dream I want to tell you about. And so then he had another dream, and he told it to his brother. Listen, he said, I had another dream. And like, if you're the older brother, you know you're rolling your eyes right now. You're just like, oh, God, can we just like kill this guy, you know, and throw him in a well? Oh, wait, that comes in a minute. All right. And listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now notice in the first one, at least he's a sheaf of grain. At this point, it's like the sun and the moon and the stars, they are bowing to me. Okay, so he tells this one to his brothers. It says when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Now I want you to notice though what Jacob does. Nothing. That's the pattern of Jacob. Jacob is a hands-off father, which is a bad pattern for parenting, by the way. He doesn't do anything. He tells him, are we really going to do this? And then he kind of leaves it alone. It says his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So here's a couple things I want you to see about Joseph. Joseph's got privilege. Okay, Joseph grows up in a messed up family, but Joseph doesn't really experience all of that. Because he's the favorite son. Because Father lavishes his love on Joseph. Because Joseph gets the new car when he's 16 years old, 17 years old. You know, Joseph gets sent to the best school. Joseph doesn't have to work like the rest. Joseph has everything in his favor. And not only that, but Joseph is having dreams that he's one day going to be a king. And that doesn't float well with these guys because they are shepherds who don't have a king. And they say to him, oh, you mean you're going to rule over us one day? We don't have any king but God. And you're going to reign over us. You're going to be in charge over us. So that's Joseph's life. It says, now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Now, at minimum, Jacob is a clueless dad if he doesn't know what's going on. I mean, if he hasn't experienced already that the brothers don't really like Joseph. And the brothers won't even talk to Joseph anymore. And so now they hate him because he was a tattletale to begin with. And he says, hey, why don't you go check on those guys and see what they're doing and report back to me. You're going to find out, are they messing around out there in the field? Are they doing some stuff they're not supposed to? Are they partying or whatever's going on? You go check on them and you come report back to me. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. Now, skip a few verses because Joseph goes, and they're not where he thought they were going to be, and some guy tells him they've moved on, so he goes on. And so the next part, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Now, do you think your kids don't like each other? This is bad, all right? If your brothers are plotting to kill you, things have gone seriously wrong in the family dynamic. They plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that ferocious animals devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. They hated his dreams. They hated this vision. Now we're going to learn in the story that God had given Joseph these dreams. I mean, God has revealed to Joseph what he's going to do in his life. But they hated Joseph for it. They hated Joseph for what God was doing in his life. They hated what was going on, and they wanted to kill him as a result. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben, who's the oldest brother, and by the way, so Joseph's 17, his older brothers, some of them are as much as 20, 25 years older than him. So this is not like a bunch of teenagers running around plotting to kill him. These are grown men, and they hate him so much that they're going to kill him. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. So he's got the oldest brother, a little bit of responsibility kind of thing going on. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Just throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Now, I don't know how you're going to throw him in the well without laying a hand on him, but that's Reuben's plan. So don't give Reuben credit for like being, well, he's the loving older brother. All he wants to do is throw him down in a well. You know? But Reuben at least has that much favor, that much regard for his responsibility as the oldest son. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. The first thing they do is they destroy the robe. They hated it. They hated what it represented. They hated that Joseph parades around in the robe. They hated that it meant God, that Father loved Joseph more than us, even though he's the kid, even though he comes along late in life. He gives him more attention and more favor. So they strip him of the robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. They took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So a cistern is what we in Texas would call a tank. Okay? It's a hole in the ground coated with limestone so that it holds water. And then when it rains, it just catches the water. So that's what it is. But this one, it's a dry time and there's no water in it. And now I want you to check this out. As they sat down to eat their meal, they just got ready to kill their brother. They threw him in a well. It's like, hey, let's eat lunch now. I mean, Joseph's in the bottom of a hole. And I mean, I just can't imagine he's just sitting there going, praise Jesus. God's got this. I mean, I imagine Joseph screaming, get me out of here. What are you guys doing? Somebody help me. And they're like eating their sandwiches and stuff. They sat down to eat their meal, and they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, Judah is the next on this, he said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hand on him. Now again, don't get the idea that Judah's like being merciful here. All Judah is doing is saying, man, if we just kill him, we won't get anything out of it. Let's at least make a profit off of it, and we'll sell him as a slave to these Ishmaelite traders who will take him away to Egypt. Dad won't ever know about it. We'll just tell Dad he's dead. And so that's what they do. It says, after all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood, and his brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites. Normal price for a slave was 30 pieces of silver. 20 shekels of silver was for a handicapped slave. I mean, like, they wouldn't even take full price for Joseph. They hated him so much. It's like, we'll just take whatever you got. 20, that's cool. So they profit off of their brother. They sell him to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes and he went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? And then they got Joseph's robe. They slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they took the ornate robe back to their father and said, we found this, examined it to see whether it is your son's robe. And the rest of the story is that Jacob believes them, that his son is dead. Now, I want you to see a few lessons about God's providence from this portion of the Joseph stories. Just some things that we can learn about God, and some things that we can learn about what God is doing in the midst of this. The first one is this: God doesn't work according to my plan. God does not work according to my plan. God does not consult me in terms of what he's going to do. God doesn't, and I am sure that 17-year-old Joseph has got his life mapped out. And his life map is something like this. I've got my Letterman jacket. I'm going to go to college and be a big stud. And then I'm going to come back and become a king, and my brothers are going to worship me. That's the extent of what Joseph thinks about life at this point. You know, most of us are very poor story writers when it comes to our lives. When it comes to what we want, when it comes to our plans for our lives. If we were writing our stories, it would go something like this. Sean was born. He had a perfectly happy childhood where nothing ever went wrong. He grew up, got married, had children, made lots of money, lived in a big house, lived to be 110 years old, was never sick a day of his life. The day he died, he was in perfect health and he died in his sleep. The end. I mean, that's the way we would write our life stories. Never any problems, never any difficulties, everything goes according to plan, and it would be a horrible story. God's got something better that he wants to do in your life. But the better thing he wants to do in your life is just like any good story, there's going to be some difficulty. There's going to be some tension. There's going to be some circumstances where if someone were reading your story, they would say, I don't know how they're going to get out of this one. I don't know how they're going to overcome. I don't know how they're going to face this. I don't know how this is going to work out in the end. But God loves writing these stories where he comes through as the hero to rescue us and deliver us, but he doesn't consult us about what we'd like to see happen. He doesn't work according to my plan. Now, God may give you a glimpse into what he's doing in your life at times. He did Joseph. He gives Joseph this glimpse of, hey, I'm going to be a prince. I mean, my family's going to bow down to me. God's going to exalt me. And God may give you a dream or a vision or a calling in your life. But that does not mean that he's going to work it out according to your schedule and your comfort and your plan and your convenience. God may not work according to your plan. In fact, he doesn't. God does what he's going to do. Now, we can always rest in the fact that he's doing it for our good and his glory, but he is in no way beholden to us in terms of what he's doing or how he's doing it. I am certain that this day in Joseph's life, that Joseph doesn't go, man, I completely understand. I know why this is happening. I know why my brothers are beating me up. I know why they want to kill me. This makes sense. Okay, so God doesn't always work according to my plan. And closely related to that is God doesn't always work in ways that I understand. When Joseph was at the bottom of that pit, beat up and bruised and hurting, I don't think he was down there singing praise to Jesus. I don't think he was in the bottom of that pit going, okay, God's got this, and he's working it out, and I understand, I completely fathom how this is all going to happen, and everything that God is going to do, and all things are working together for good. I think Joseph was in the bottom of the pit screaming, somebody get me out of here! Help! Maybe if he's crying out to God, he's saying, why are you doing this? I thought I was going to be a prince, and I thought they were going to bow down to me, and now they are not bowing down to me, they have thrown me in the bottom of a pit. So God, what are you doing? Why are you doing things like this? You know, our mistake is in thinking that because God is working all things for good, that I will know how he's going to work them out. And I don't. You know why? Because he's smarter than I am. And he sees a whole lot more than I do. I know we've talked about this before, but in life we have a peephole perspective. All we can see in life is what's right in front of us through people. All we can see is what's going on right now. All we can see are the limited perspective from our understanding. And we somehow get the mistaken idea that because I see this, and because of this and what this person's doing, and I understand that I've got a full view of all things that are working out, and I can somehow predict what's going to happen. Or I can somehow be in control of what's going to happen. The reality is there are infinite factors that go on every day of your life in circumstances that you don't have a clue about what's going on. And so it's arrogance on our part to think we can figure them out, to think that we can necessarily understand it. But the great truth is this: you don't have to understand what God is doing to trust Him. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to know where God is going with things in your life to trust in what He's doing in your life. 10 years ago, Larissa and I got pregnant. Actually, Larissa got pregnant. I had a part to play, but she was the one that got pregnant. All right. And we'd been through a difficult time in our marriage, and man, we felt like this was just God's evidence of God's blessing, and we had this baby. And Larissa called me on a Thursday. She was at work, and she said, I'm bleeding. Need to call a doctor and talk to the doctor about what's going on. So she called the doctor, and the doctor said, well, just go home, lay down. It's probably not anything. You'll come see us tomorrow on Friday. And so on Friday, we went to the doctor and got to the doctor's office, and they started listening for the heartbeat, looking for the baby's heartbeat. And you know, it was one of those things where the doctor did not say anything. It's actually, the doctor wasn't there that day. It was a nurse practitioner. And she's just, moving the little thing around. And we're watching, and we're like, I don't hear anything. She keeps looking, and she says, well, maybe the baby's just hiding or something. So let me go get the sonogram, and we'll take a look at that. And it's that moment, as you're waiting for her and going, I didn't hear anything. Did you hear anything? So she comes back in and does the sonogram, and we're both looking for the little tiny heartbeat, the little blip. And we didn't see anything. She looked and she looked and she looked. She didn't see anything. She said, well, I think you've lost the baby. She said, but come back on Monday when the doctor's here, and we'll let him take a look. And so I remember that weekend, just of grieving and of realizing that we miscarried. And I remember wrestling with trying to figure out and say, God, what are you doing? God, why are you doing this? Why are you working this out this way? And I remember the thought that just drilled into my heart in that weekend was, I don't have to understand what God is doing to trust Him. So if you don't get anything else from this, understand that. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to understand what God is doing. You don't have to make sense of it to trust Him in the midst of that. Because what you're trusting in, you're not trusting in what He's going to do. You're trusting in the fact that He's got it, whatever it is. And He's good, and He's more than capable of dealing with whatever comes into your life. So God, our problem is that we think that we have to have it all figured out, but I don't always have to understand it to trust God. One last thing. God always works out His plan. He may not work it out according to my plan. And He may not work it out in a way that I understand. Listen, there are some things that go on in your life that you may not understand them for a year or two down the road. There are going to be some things that happen in your life that you may not, it may be 5 years down the road. It may be 10 years down the road. It may be 20 years down the road until you finally gain perspective and you finally understand. Listen, there are going to be some things that God's going to do and God's going to work in your life that you may not understand until you get to heaven and you are in eternity and you finally get God's perspective and you see everything that God saw and it finally makes all sense. But the point is that God always works out His plan. So what we have to do as human beings is rest in that. And when life gets difficult and when life gets tough, we just trust that God's got it together. When we talk about Joseph, we often, like I said, we key in on that coat of many colors. You know what God had to do? God had to strip Joseph. God had to tear that coat up and bloody it. God had to take Joseph and throw him into the bottom of a well so that He could use him, so that He could change him. God had a purpose and a plan in Joseph's life. And we're going to see it worked out as we go through. But here's the deal. God can't use you until he breaks you. God can't use you until he puts you in a place where he is chiseling away the things in your life that don't look like Jesus. Where he is working, and listen, when he does that, it is often tough and difficult. But God has got to do that so that he can work out his plan in your life, and that is the heart of providence. That God causes all things to work together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purposes. How can you know that God is working for your good? If you've listened to his call. If you've become his child. If you said, God, here's my life. If you've trusted in Jesus Christ, then you can know no matter what happens, no matter what life throws you, no matter how hard it gets, no matter the circumstances that God brings into your life, that God has already definitively